Perfect. So we'll just get going and just kind of start. Anyway, so I'd just like to say my name is Richard Curtin, and I'd like to welcome everyone here to this evening's webinar, Connecting Struggles to Break the Fracking Cycle. So as I was saying, I just want to kind of briefly just talk a bit about Not Here, Not Anywhere. So we were established in 2017, and we're a non-partisan volunteer campaign group. Our main focus was to stop offshore drilling in Irish waters for oil and gas, but also to ban the construction of any new fossil fuel infrastructure like the planned LNG terminals for both Cork and Kerry. We'll hear more about them throughout the webinar. So the reason why we wanted to host this webinar was to debunk the myths that the fossil fuel industry are trying to sell us, that LNG is a clean gas and play a part in our transition to renewable energy system. We also wanted to highlight the suffering these projects caused upstream in America from frack wells, pipelines, compressor stations, and export terminals. Hearing these testimonials this evening will allow us to showcase to the Irish government and to the European Commissioner for Trade, Phil Hogan, that Trump's dirty freedom gas can play no part in our energy mix. I'd just like to quote Audre Lorde, who once said that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live in single issue lives. So many American organizations played a vital role in getting fracking banned here in 2007. And it's these American struggles against fracking and LNG is our struggles too. This dirty industry does not belong in anybody's backyard, and by connecting these struggles together, we can win. So this evening, speakers, we have Leann, Leiter from, and apologies if I don't get the pronunciations fully correct, so we've Leann Leiter from Earthworks, we've Tracey Carluccio from the Delaware Rivers Network. So we've Tribal Chairman Juan Mancias of the Carrizo Comecrudo tribe of Texas. We've Patrick Anderson from Save Rio Grande Valley from LNG. We've Johnny McGilligan from Safety Before LNG, and we've Dr. Sive Lee from Doctors from the Irish Environment. So the format of the event is each speaker will have 10 minutes speaking time, and then what we do is we're going to have Q&A section at the end. But if you have any questions throughout the actual event, just put them in the comments section, and then we can address them at the end. My campaign colleague, Aidan Doherty, is going to facilitate the Q&A section. So I just want to has Leann entered in, Aidan, can you see? No, perfect. So we're just waiting on one of the speakers. She's got delayed. So in the interim, what I was going to briefly just discuss was there was one particular project that we've been heavily campaigning on, is the Cork LNG project. And basically in 2017, this Next Decade Energy, which we'll hear more about later in one of our speakers, each of the speakers, they signed a memorandum of understanding with Port of Cork. And what they wanted to do was establish a floating gas terminal in the Port of Cork to kind of a portable kind of LNG terminal. And it's interesting because the particular project has kind of very much went under the radar, but like we're trying to kind of build a campaign around it. And there's been, probably the last 6 months to a year, it's really kind of built. So both Cork City Council and both Cork County Council have they have put motions in, they're the local authorities in those particular areas, and they put motions in asking the Port of Cork to drop the memorandum of understanding. So this kind of highlights or showcase that this particular projects have no community's consent, they have no local consent. So it'll be interesting to see. We're still kind of put pressure on the Port of Cork to find out what the details of the memorandum of understanding, because we've heard from our fellow campaigners in Texas and that, because they Next Decade keep using this project as potential future earnings. So the minute that we can get that MOU dumped between Port of Cork and Next Decade, that's going to have a massive win for the campaigns in Texas as well. And perfect. So that's just a quick introduction in relation to that. Has Leann? Perfect. No, so what we do is we might just go straight to Tracey, if that's okay. So Tracey, yeah, I'm going to just unmute you. So it's Tracey Carluccio from the Earthworks. And bear with me 1 second. You should be unmuted there now.
Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. Oh, wait, here's Leann, actually.
Oh, well, we'll let Leann go first.
Okay, right, perfect, right. Sorry.
Hello.
Leann, how you doing? Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry that I missed beginning introductions. Folks might have told you I triple booked between a couple of meetings happening right now, but I was just so honored to be able to join. So thank you so much for making time for me. Should I jump right in with the slides that I prepared? Okay, give me just 1 second here to make sure I can get those to come up. And let's see, will we be able to see these? How does that look to everyone? Are you able to see those slides? Okay, great. Well, thank you again so much. I am just wishing all of you from everywhere that you're calling in from, that you're all doing well and staying healthy. And thank you for taking the time to hear from me today. My name is Leann Leiter. I'm with Earthworks. We're a small environmental nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C. I, however, live and work in the Appalachian region in the U.S. Specifically, I live in Washington County, Pennsylvania, and I'll be talking a little bit more about where I live. But suffice it to say, I'm in the heart of the shale gas boom here in Pennsylvania. My county is the most has the most fracked gas wells out of the entire state, and our state is second only to Texas. To position with where I'm at. And today I'll be talking specifically about some of the air pollution impacts from oil and gas development. Which might not sound super exciting, but what I get to share with you, which I think is very exciting, is the visual proof that myself and my colleagues gather of the normally invisible air pollution that I'm going to share with you today and tell you about how you can share it with others. So this is a glimpse of the populations in the Appalachian region that live within a ½ mile or less of an oil and gas facility. So between just the states of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, there are over 5 million people that live within that very small ½ mile threat radius. And one of the reasons why this is a big concern is because of the air pollution. So I think you'll be hearing about some of the other impacts of oil and gas in the Appalachian region from some of the other speakers. But air pollution is one of those really significant health concerns. And that's because the pollution occurs at every stage along the development, from the point of extraction at the wellhead to the processing, transport. There's even studies coming out recently that are showing air quality impacts when gas is being used in homes for residential use. So really the entire supply chain has air pollution problems associated with it. And I think that one of the reasons why the air pollution issue is such a big one and why it's so hard to tackle is because most of this pollution from the industry is invisible. It doesn't usually look like smoke or something that you can see. And furthermore, most of the development that's happening is in very rural areas like the community where I live in Washington County. So if you're not looking directly at a fracking rig, you might just assume, well, there's farms, there's forests, they must have great air quality. But in fact, the numbers do show that we have a variety of problems, including high levels of ground level ozone, which is very dangerous for lung health. So one of the ways in which we try to address this problem is by, as I said, making the invisible visible. And we do that using a really specialized tool called an optical gas imaging camera. And you can see one of my colleagues holding one of our cameras here. The brand name is FLIR camera. So I'm seeing some nods. Folks might have heard of the FLIR camera before. And basically what this is it's an incredibly complex tool. I won't go into all the science of it, but just to give you an idea, each camera costs about $100,000, and that's just the base model. So really specialized technology used by the US EPA, used by oil and gas operators themselves. And we are all fully trained and certified as optical gas imaging thermographers, myself included. There's just a handful of us at Earthworks that do this task. And we have the same training as the regulatory agencies do. So what the camera does is you can see kind of two images here on the screen, I think. The top one is what you would see with the naked eye at a compressor station, which compressor stations, if you're not familiar, are used to move gas along pipelines. They can be every 20 miles or so along a pipeline, depending on topography. And it has a number of large engines in that building or outside of it that are used to create that vacuum to move the gas along. So the top is what you see with the naked eye, and the bottom image that's moving is what you see through the optical gas imaging camera. So all of that pollution is coming out of there pretty much on a 24/7 basis. And I'll share more examples as we go on here. This is just letting you see the camera in action. This is not at a fracking site. This is a conventional or shallow well located in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. We have literally thousands of oil and gas sites already within our national forest and other public lands in the Appalachian state. So you can see this beautiful landscape here, but it's also being filled with, unfortunately, air pollution from many, many facilities. And folks always ask me, so what am I seeing in these black and white images, these moving images? And these are the various gases that the camera is designed to detect. It's a little over 20, I think, different gases. And these are all known to be associated with oil and gas development. This camera really is designed specifically for this purpose. I'm going to highlight just a few. One is methane, and that contributes to that ground level ozone that I mentioned earlier. But it's also a super powerful climate pollutant. We're talking like 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide when looked at over a 20-year time period. And then some of these gases that the camera can detect include known and suspected carcinogens and other health-harming compounds. So anytime we're looking at one of these OGI videos, we might be seeing any combination of those gases. So here are just a few quick examples. I'm going to start with a few that are close to home for me. This is a well pad that's under development. And where we took this photo and then the optical gas imaging video is from the sidewalk on a residential street on an adjacent hill. And when we turned on the OGI camera, you can see that there's actually a great deal of pollution coming from what's likely a number of engines on the site. And there for comparison is what it looks like to the naked eye. Here's another example of a well pad also under development. My colleague Pete holding one of our cameras. And you can see that those red tanks that were there in the background are emitting a large plume of hydrocarbons. And this was just something we happened to be lucky or unlucky enough to catch on camera. We had some state legislators with us at the time, which was great for them to be able to see this. But there's no warning given to community members in the farms and homes that are surrounding this area. Here's another compressor station. And here's another look at the pollution that comes out of these. There are homes and farms surrounding this compressor station as well. I know some of these families personally, and a number of them have reported some really concerning health impacts that they feel are connected to living near this facility. And I always want to point out that this is not some special event or a blowdown or anything like that. This is pretty much a standard pollution release. I've been to this site probably close to a dozen times over the past few years with the OGI camera and see a very similar pollution profile on each visit. So people are basically living with this pollution day in and day out. And then you might be wondering, what we do with all of these videos. They are available to the public, and I'll get to that here in just a moment. But we also report problems when we see them, problems that could be a violation and could be fixed, to the regulatory agencies who are tasked with protecting the public, with enforcing rules and regulations. But what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that the rules, the regulations, and the enforcement are just not sufficient to adequately protect human health. So in this one site, and we'll see a second example of it in a moment from a year later, over a period of about two and a half years, we used the OGI camera to detect a number of various problems. And it wasn't just us saying that they were problems. The regulatory agency agreed with us And although it took many, many months, it required the operator to make fixes. But unfortunately, the fixes themselves created new problems. The site is in much better shape now. The residents are much happier, but they had to live with this pollution for over 2.5 years. And they live about 500 feet from where this well pad was built. I'm just going to bring us to the end here to keep on time. This is just one example from Ohio. Note the blue condensate tanks there, and you can see what's most likely an Nardo valve. It's a type of release valve on top of the tanks that's just spewing out a plume of pollution. You can find more about our work at this link here, cep.earthworks.org. And I always ask of everyone, if you're so willing, to please consider sharing sharing this visual proof. I think it's important for us to all spread the word, but when we can spread visual evidence of this pollution, I think it can really have an impact, whether it's through social media or sharing it with your local decision makers and elected officials. All of that makes a big difference to educating and I think changing the course of this development in my region and hopefully in yours. And here is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm going to be able to stay on a few minutes, but again, my apologies that I won't be able to stay on for questions at the end. So please feel free to add them and they will be sent to me, or you can reach out to me directly, and I'd love to answer anything that comes up. Thank you, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Leann. That was a fascinating presentation. So we're just quickly along, and we're going to have Tracey Carluccio from Earthworks, or sorry, from the Delaware Riverkeepers network. So, all right. 2 seconds there now, and sorry, can you hear me? Just unmuting you there now. Just taking. Can you hear me? Sorry about that. Technology issues.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you, everybody, for joining the webinar today and for inviting Delaware Riverkeeper Network to take part in it. We think it's really important to connect these dots, and we thank you for doing that. So I don't have slides, but what I'd like to do is begin the story of New Fortress Energy's United States LNG export plans. And I'd like to do that with an illustration of how they operate according to the way we've experienced. So you can get a picture of the very privileged and really ruthless nature of their business model that works so diligently to manipulate our energy systems. And that's to exploit our resources, of course. New Fortress Energy, through their subsidiary, Delaware River Partners, began at least 4 years ago to develop a site in Gibbstown, New Jersey, which is near where my organization's offices are. And that's on the Delaware River, and they began to develop it as an export terminal. And emblematic of their sort of standard operating procedure, they never let on publicly what their real intentions were, and that was to export liquefied natural gas, and proceeded through cutting the project up into little bites, filing applications with various agencies that didn't match one another, and misleading the public with a classic bait and switch maneuver to secure approvals for what would, in the end, be the first liquefied natural gas export terminal of its kind in the United States, the first LNG export facility in the Delaware River, and the first in the state of New Jersey. And they even got federal help with their secrets from a federal agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to allow them to avoid regulation. And it gets worse when you look at where the LNG would come from, which is north central Pennsylvania's Marcellus Shale region. And that is where New Fortress Energy, in a similar fashion, quietly secured what they needed from the state and the local government to start construction in Wyalusing, PA, of what they call a landlocked LNG liquefaction facility using fracked gas extracted from Bradford County and regional wells. And they would transport the fracked gas in liquid form by trucks, hundreds of them every day. or by rail around the clock over 200 miles through Pennsylvania and New Jersey communities, endangering everyone along the way. They even benefited from the support of the Trump administration. Trump issued an executive order last year pushing for LNG to be moved by rail on the nation's railways. And that is currently banned in the United States due to safety issues. He did this so it could be exported for sale overseas because it needs to be liquefied to get there. Amazingly, a New Fortress Energy subsidiary even secured a special permit to use rail cars designed 50 years ago and never used to transport liquefied natural gas to get the LNG from their Pennsylvania Wyalusing plant to Gibbstown. Another weird and untested and highly dangerous aspect of New Fortress Energy's LNG scheme that would bring LNG to Ireland. Similar to the proposed terminals in Ireland, New Fortress Energy's facilities in the United States are environmentally destructive. They lack adequate regulatory oversight that would prevent pollution or minimize pollution and safety hazards, and they're designed only, frankly, to line the pockets of special interest, regardless of the tremendous and really indelibly damaging costs for the public. And the costs are enormous in terms of public safety and health because of the hazardous nature of liquefied natural gas, heightened at these facilities by the perpetual 24/7, 365 days a year transloading operations at the Gibbstown and Wyalusing plants. They would move from the trucks that they bring to Gibbstown and from the rail cars that they bring to Gibbstown directly through pipes onto waiting ships. The Gibbstown LNG export terminal threatens the local residential community and its schools and parks, even a daycare center at their entrance, who would be within the hazard zone should there be an accident at the site, but also Pennsylvania residents across the Delaware River who have had no say at all in the project, including an environmental justice community in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is the closest densely urban area. Ships laden with hazardous and potentially explosive LNG would travel on the Delaware River and the Delaware Bay, right past the state of Delaware's cities and communities and the bay shores of South Jersey and Delaware, and then out to the ocean overseas for sale. Endangered Atlantic sturgeon and special aquatic resources will all be in harm's way on the Delaware River. Despite these impacts, government agencies have granted approvals, but my organization, Delaware Riverkeeper Network, has appealed the 3 major permits that have been given for the facility, and we're now in court, and we're pledged to fight that to the bitter end. A coalition of organizations in New Jersey called Empower New Jersey and Protect Northern PA, a coalition based in the northern Susquehanna River Wyalusing region, have banded together in this struggle. These coalitions, and particularly Empower New Jersey, has a special mission, and that is to pledge to stop fossil fuel development. We want to see the LNG scheme, this one, and other fracking and fossil fuel projects replaced with renewable, truly clean energy that doesn't emit greenhouse gases. We heard from Leann what is really going on in terms of the emissions from these fracking sites and every place along its supply chain. The methane that would be released, that is cradle to grave, from the fracked well, to the gathering lines, to the Wyalusing LNG plant, to the transport by truck and rail, to the never-ending transloading at Gibbstown directly onto the ships, to the shipping vessels, and then finally to the import terminals, would all emit greenhouse gases, particularly 98% of it methane. And it's not only Ireland, New Fortress Energy also already sends some LNG through a very small operation in Florida to Jamaica. They plan to send it to Puerto Rico as well. They even say in their Securities and Exchange Commission filings that they have contracts to deliver it in Angola, and then in their various monthly talks to their investors, they talk about even greater far afield terminals in places such as Asia. So all of these ports that would eventually get this LNG, of course, are going to also contribute methane and then carbon when the gas is actually burned. And that is one of the reasons that many organizations in the United States are opposed to this, and also opposed to the movement of LNG by rail, and put a large amount of testimony on the public record to oppose that. Because all of this methane will worsen the global climate crisis that we're all so desperately fighting. And one thing that I think we have found as we've gone through this process with New Fortress Energy is that every piece of their project is dependent on another piece. And they're actually very vulnerable. They think that they've come up with this great scheme of developing what they call landlocked LNG processing plants out in the shale fields. But it does require the movement by trucks because they've decided to avoid federal oversight by not trying to build a pipeline. So instead, they're using very dangerous trucks. They've gotten the Trump administration to support them to actually move it by rail just on this one route between Wyalusing and Gibbstown. But all of these parts of this scheme are very complicated. And it means that if we can loosen that supply chain, if we can get in the middle of what they're trying to do by exposing how dangerous it is, how poorly regulated it is, and how financially it really is skating on thin ice, particularly in today's market, then we have a chance of actually beating this. We've learned that, basically terminals are terminal. And we feel that the supply chain that feeds these systems just has to be broken. And that's the way that we can actually strategically approach success. So that's all I really wanted to cover right now. I'd like to answer, any kind of questions that people have. Of course, we have a lot more information, but you get starting into the details too far, and I think we'll lose people. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Thank you very much for Delaware Riverkeeper Network.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So next up, we've Tribal Chairman Juan Mancias of the Carrizo Comecrudo tribe of Texas. So Tribal Chairman, I'm going to just unmute you there now.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's afternoon here. It might be morning or evening there, but
yeah.
It's nice. It's nice talking to you.
Perfect. Do you want to turn on your video, or are you okay to leave it off?
I'm okay with turning it off right now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have anything prepared. I was just asking one of my associates if they had something, but if you need anything, just go to our Carrizo Comecrudo tribal page on Facebook, and you can see the whole tribunal that we held this past weekend to try and come up with some, good facts and some results that we could use, to maintain some kind of a delay tactic in trying to get these LFGs. For me, LNG means lethal native genocide. That's from my perspective, because that's exactly what they're doing when they failed to recognize the original people of the land. And we still have that kind of mentality, which is kind of an inset colonized mentality in this area, where if you're not recognized by the U.S. government, you're not a tribe. And it's sad because it's part of the ethnic cleansing that goes on. And are you there?
Yeah. No, I'm listening. Yeah, we're all listening.
Okay, and so that's one of the problems that we continue to encounter, is that people are so romanticized with the Hollywood version of Native Americans that they don't realize that a lot of us were a people that just kind of survived by trying to maintain our identities in a different way. And now that we have reclaimed our lands and reclaimed our identity, because the land does define who we are, we want to be able to say places like a national historic site like Garcia Pasture, where they're proposing the Texas LNG. And with the limited understanding of people understanding what the tribes were like, because they never asked us, you know, where we lived or how we lived, or, you know, how we carried ourselves. It's always been this assumptive historical data that's been put out there, so everybody, you know, kind of wants to jump on the bandwagon afterwards by saying, you know, well, we always knew this, you know. But the fact being that it's the LNGs that are involved are very disrespectful at disrupting the growth of an identity that has, you know, been around for over 10,000 years. And again, I find myself always on trying to defend and protect an identity that's been around for a long, long time, because people really don't understand, you know, the capability of resiliency that our people have had in Texas. Primarily, you'd have to understand that Texas history is known for its racist attitude toward Native Americans, and its attempt to get rid of all natives in the area and move them into what was called Indian territory, or to Mexicanize them. In other words, to move them across the river. So for us, we never, excuse me, we never left either side of these areas. So we actually have people on both sides of the river. And in reality, to understand South Texas, you'd have to understand that the first major towns or villages, I mean, and I'm talking about villages in the sense of the European settlements that were set, were all on the south side of the Rio Grande. And the Rio Grande became a buffer against what they considered us to be the savages. So for a long time, you know, we were going both back and forth. And then at first contact around the 1500s, the early 1500s, we were, you know, set up to be considered a conquerable people. And when they forded the river in 1532, there's history to all of this. They actually talk about the, you know, all of the things that the atrocities they did to our people. And so we have to be aware of that and be able to talk about those things. And if you don't know about those things, I think people need to find out what really happened in Texas with the Native American. And of course, the Stockholm Syndrome became a natural concept here in this country, where people were just so intimidated that they just became part of everything that was there. So you have all of this mentality that is become part of the areas down in that area, and you don't see very many Native people from the area speaking up. But of course, we're there now that we've gotten an education and are able to do and know where to go for the researches and understand the legalities of all of it. We try to do the best we can to keep our sacred sites from being continually gentrified by any kind of fabrication plants, or even these LNG export terminals that they're proposing out there. What we found is that the Garcia pasture is not just one village, but is a continuation of villages that go all the way into Brownsville. There was a lot of villages that were in that area because of the fishing industry that was there, that we used to come in and fish. And then around this time of the year, the hurricane season, the monsoon season, since it was lowlands and it was susceptible to flooding, we would move out and go hunting. And that's what I think that we need to kind of let the public know about what really is happening, is that a lot of the archaeology, the anthropology, the historical facts are being distorted, and they're being kept out of the EIS. And when that happens, you have a continuation of this ethnic cleansing, even by the more progressive people who failed to try to be open to the ideas of who we are as Native people in Texas, and who we've been all along. You know, and our burial sites are being decimated and desecrated by a lot of these pipelines, including the one at Oyster Creek up in around Surfside, where they're planning to have an LNG out in the middle of the Gulf, and have a pipeline run to it from one of the clearing plants that they will have in that area. We've seen a lot of the destruction and the distortion that happens with this, and the misinformation that is put out a lot of times. I mean, me personally, I'm getting attacked right now because, I mean, of being so vocal about this, and even because of the tribunal. And the tribunal, I mean, explicitly spoke about pipelines and spoke about the LNGs that they're proposing on top of this area. And we had archaeological experts to be able to, and they didn't even present the whole thing. They were presenting part of it. But there's more information coming in as we go along. As we can start cutting off, you know, and start making people realize that you can't continue to be digging up graves just to build up another pipeline to make money. So you're using people you're actually desecrating people's and disrespecting people's identity and lifestyle to do that. Because I don't see them going around digging up Davy Crockett or George Washington to see if he had wooden teeth. But they sure do dig us up, and I don't know why, and I don't know why they're studying us. And but it's time that it stops, and it's time that, you know, this LNG and fracked gas is stopped as well. But we can't. None of the people that live in the area, Native people, can be denied the fact that they have a right to speak up and to try to protect what they are. So we're not protesting a lot. We're protecting a lot. And that's what we're doing. And we need to make sure that they understand that we're defending ourselves from the ignorance that's out there. That's the enemy. And a lot of times it's that people just don't want to find out, or they think they know it all. And they're going to tell us how to do stuff. I mean, and I feel like sometimes that I'm at a disadvantage because people aren't really listening, and they want us to listen all the time, and they want us to change, so to make them comfortable. And that's what is happening. I mean, whether we change or not, they don't care anymore. They're going to make themselves comfortable one way or the other. So it's time to make the Native people comfortable as well. And you know, we've been kind of always in a real hard time, especially now with these LNGs coming in. They're really hurting our identities and our lifeways. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, Tribal Chairman. That was a powerful testimonial, and I viewed some of the tribunal there last week, and it was, some of the testimonies were absolutely was fantastic. And one thing that really stuck with me was the idea of changing, deconstruction the language, where it was not liquefied natural gas. It's like there's nothing natural about it. It was liquefied fracked gas, and as you described it as well. Like it's but yeah, thank you very much for sharing that.
Well, it's all part of changing the narrative.
Yeah,
we can change, because they're defining things. They're telling us what critical infrastructures are, and to us, the critical infrastructures: the air, the water, the land, and the human beings. Those are critical infrastructures should be to all of us. And they're telling us it's their pipelines and it's their walls and it's their LNGs, and we're saying no. You know, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Changing the discourse and changing the story is very powerful. Perfect. So thank you again, Tribal Chairman.
Men up there.
So we're going to move on to Patrick Anderson from Patrick Anderson from Save Rio Grande Valley from LNG. Apologies, Patrick. I got a bit tongue-tied. So can you hear?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this and putting this all together. Certainly, we are brothers and sisters across the sea, because we have at least one thing that's in common that's kind of threatening our way of life, and that is next decade and their projects. I'll share my screen here and kind of go through who we are and as an organization and what we've been doing. Let's see. Okay, are we okay? Can we all see my screen? Yes. Okay. Save RGV. We're just regular people. We are just community members. We're teachers. Some of us are some of the people involved are lawyers or engineers. But I will say a lot of teachers for some reason or another. We've had college students get involved. A lot of people are retired. So it's just regular community members that want a comparatively better area and way of life than what oil and gas industry provides. And I'll be coming back to that in a little bit. We are in the United States in this very little corner, in this red dot. That's where we are. So we're along the Gulf of Mexico, way down south. So everything's pretty much north and west of us. So that's kind of geographically kind of where we are at, to put things in perspective. Now, Rio Grande LNG is proposing to put in infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure, in an area that is not industrialized. Yes, it is a port, but it's not industrialized. It is between two different national wildlife refuges. And so that is definitely a concern for us, because for decades, the area has been trying to connect these two wildlife refuges for biological diversity purposes, especially with regards to migration north and south, and to have connectivity to Mexico. So these are where the projects are. We have 3 LNG projects being proposed next decade. That's the Rio Grande LNG. So next decade is kind of the umbrella company to Rio Grande LNG. The only connectivity technically on paper legally is this red box here, and that's a wildlife corridor, and that area is leased from the Port of Brownsville by the National Fish and Wildlife Service. So that area is being leased right now. The area here that says Innova LNG, that used to be leased to the Wildlife Service, but the port took it away and gave it to Innova LNG to develop. You can see lots of bodies of water, lots of wetlands that will be destroyed or directly or indirectly impacted by next decade and the other 2 LNG facilities. This is kind of what the area looks like, heavily vegetated. So you will see kind of tropical vegetation, cacti, thorn scrubs, habitat that's for ocelots. We do have endangered turtles and things like that in these areas. So it can look like that. It can look like wetlands with a bunch of mangrove and things like that. So this is what the area looks like now. It's not an industrial type area. And this is the wildlife corridor that I spoke about.
T-shirts with that quarter on it.
Okay, the area also, now speaking about climate change, man, I want to say, was it 2 years ago, Hurricane Harvey hit the coastal Texas up north a little bit, wreaked a lot of havoc. And because of the oil and gas infrastructure there, massive pollution because of hurricane damage and flooding. And these are kind of the flooding areas, and you can see that Texas LNG is being built in not Texas LNG, I'm sorry, Rio Grande LNG, which is, if I can maybe annotate real quick. which is right here. That's where they're proposing in a flood-prone area. So, oops, and mouse. Okay, and one of the other impacts that we're concerned about as an organization is the massive pollution. And I'm going to tie this back to Earthworks. Earthworks pointed out that their pollution is not visible. You can't really smell it. And we had our port commissioners visit LNG facilities, and they said it's very, very clean. There's nothing to worry about. Well, if you were to, from our presentation from Earthworks, say, we know that that is not true. You cannot see all of the pollution that these facilities will emit. This is a graphic produced by the Rainforest Action Network. We have partnered with them, and they've helped us out. And with the 3 LNG facilities proposed, that will equal 63 coal-fired power plants in terms of pollution. So this is not clean energy. This is not a way forward to addressing climate change. And several banks, we need more, but several banks have realized this and have backed out of funding for these projects. We need more banks to realize this as well. In terms of air pollution, total from our 3 LNG projects that have, that if built, will produce 13,924,961,000.24 tons of pollution per year. Okay. Now, it's important to note that Rio Grande LNG, or Next Decade, has said that beyond 1 mile, it will not affect anyone. So in terms of the regulatory agencies, if it's beyond 1 mile of their facility, it really will have no effect. That's what they are saying. And they really have provided no basis for that 1 mile radius from their facility. So they're saying anybody outside of 1 mile from that pollution, there will be no effects. So just to make a note on what Next Decade and Rio Grande is selling. In terms of economics, we're also concerned about economics. Between tax breaks, bailout money, tax money used to address the consequences of climate change. And then not only that, but we have tax money going to protect oil and gas infrastructure such as seawalls. So this is accounting to billions of dollars of taxpayer money. So money that I am paying to our government, and they're taking that money to give to oil and tax companies. And what this is really equates to a transfer in wealth, favoring the oil and gas companies and the CEOs. So we're really concerned about that as well. So that's just kind of on the tip of the iceberg, some of the things that we're concerned about, some of the things that we have been trying to tell and inform our leaders about. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. That's a fascinating presentation. So we'll discuss it more in the Q&A section. I find it bizarre in relation to the tax deductions that it's promised to a lot of these oil and gas companies over there as well. Perfect. So I'm going to pass it over. So we're going to go to the Irish side now. So we're going to have Johnny McElligott from Safety Before LNG. So I briefly spoke about Cork LNG earlier, and Johnny has been involved from day one on the campaign to stop Shannon LNG. So Johnny, over to you now. Can you hear Johnny?
Hi. So just checking, can you see my screen there okay?
Yeah, I can see your screen perfectly, yeah.
That's good. Okay, so well, my name is John McElligott, and I've been involved in the campaign against Shannon LNG since 2007. So we got to know a lot of what was the different aspects of fighting Shannon LNG, from health grounds, climate grounds, environmental grounds, safety grounds, and we've basically been through the ringer with them in many different occasions. The latest is to do with the trade deal that was assigned. Well, it was a statement on a trade agreement that was signed in 2018, July 25th, and it was Europe basically saying that they agreed to import American fracked gas. and that they would build terminals in Europe, and they would give them an accreditation called projects of common interest. And that means that when they go for planning, they would be entitled to be considered as being of overriding public interest. And that means that it would be like fast track approval. So you'd say, where is the problem and what is wrong with that if it's just bringing in gas from America? But the problem is going back to global warming, and it's due to the methane leakage from that fracked gas. Okay, it's a climate issue that I'm talking about now, but it's important to remember where we're coming from. And the scientists have told us that, you know, if you're an optimist, you say that you can make a difference in stopping global warming going beyond the 2 degrees, the tipping level. But the scientists are pretty much agreed now that you cannot do that with CO2 reduction measures alone, that you have to use CH4, which is methane, and black carbon measures. And that will give you about a half a degree in the global, the rate of global warming. It's our only way to keep below the 2 degrees tipping point. That is what the science is telling us. It's because methane, the big influence with methane is that it has a half-life of 12 years. And when it has a half-life of 12 years, it means the impact is immediate, relatively immediate. You could get that half a degree any stage in the future, but because we're so close to tipping point, now is the time. So from a climate perspective, that's the real issue. You're trying to reduce methane emissions. So we move on and we kind of ask the question, where is the methane coming from? And that's when it gets really interesting, is that the latest scientific research says it all there in the slide, is that 1/3 of our global emission increases over the last 10 years from the whole world is coming from fracking in the United States. And Professor Robert Howard, who's an expert in the area, he gave a presentation to the Irish Parliamentary Climate Oireachtas Committee, and he basically made the calculation that importing fracked gas from America would be have a carbon equivalent footprint 44% greater than the coal that we use to import to Moneypoint from Colombia. And that's without even including the shipping, the emissions from shipping, etc. This was just a very basic calculation at 44%. And the problem is, people look at that and they say, what is the problem with that? But the problem is that everyone tries to say that gas is clean. And it's true that when you burn it, it emits less CO2 emissions than burning coal. But the problem is that if you include all the methane that gets leaked and doesn't get burnt, or the methane that's purposefully vented, such as in, you know, when you're venting methane throughout the process, they are not included. These are what we call non-territorial emissions, and that's our problem. So methane emissions are the Achilles heel of fracked gas, especially. Because fracking, they're building so many wells. There's 1.7 million wells in the States at the moment and counting. They're like throwaway disposable wells, but they leave a lot of methane going into the atmosphere. So our whole campaign of the last couple of years has been a climate mitigation campaign to stop the methane emissions, which is accelerating global warming. And so I was find it interesting when we look at Shannon LNG as a company. Now that's the New Fortress company in Ireland, New Fortress Energy company in Ireland, and they want to import the gas from the United States. But they've already told two very serious lies. And lies are like, it's where the moment trust is broken. And as you can see there on the slide, it's that they asserted at the very beginning that, you know, if there's a leak, it would dissipate into the atmosphere, no problem. It would all happen very close to the source and that there would be no problem. And the second thing is they said that they denied at the European Commission meeting in May last year, which I attended, and they said that there was discussion about frack gas, but they said they never said where they were sourcing its gas, and they knew nothing about the assumption that frack gas was what they were going to import. Very blatantly lied to the European Commission. But as Tracey pointed out earlier, their submissions to the Security and Exchange Commission catches them out in the States, where they admit point blank in black and white that they are going to import frack gas from the Marcellus Shale. So we're going back to our roots a little bit here by just looking at what are the main safety issues from gas, from liquefied natural gas. And the science has told us that anyone within 3 miles is in harm's way if there's a leak. And the second thing is that LNG clouds, vapor clouds, are they're heavier than air, so they keep moving along the ground if there is a leak, and they can travel up to 12.4 kilometers, staying close to the ground the whole time until they meet an ignition source. And this is very important, especially on water. So I know that in the States they have a lot of laws about LNG on land, but the LNG on water, which the export terminals would be, that raises a whole lot of other safety issues. So the 3 miles is very important. Now, I'm just going to, for your diversion, to show you a video of the 1987. It was the fall contests at the Department of Energy, the US Department of Energy Test Center in Nevada. And I think this is the first time that it's actually been shown. But it was a test basically to say the effects of building a vapor fence around a spill area. So there was a small quantity of liquid natural gas released. It absorbed in a pond where there was water, and it absorbed the vapor from the water and mixed with air, but it went over the vapor fence and continued to travel. So that just proved that it was heavier than air. So I'll just show you the video now, which is a very interesting video. It's only about 2 minutes long, but if you watch it closely, that the video will show you that, sorry, this is going. So there's a release of about 40 cubic meters of LNG. It's super cooled and it's leaked onto water. And the problem when you leak LNG onto water is that it absorbs the heat from the water. And this causes what we call a rapid phase transition. It's where the methane heats up violently, and then it will create flameless explosions when they actually evaporate. It evaporates all of a sudden. Now this video this is the first time it's been shown since 12 years, and I don't think it's ever been shown in public. I couldn't find it on the internet anyway. It was shown by Dr. Jerry Havens at the Board Pleanála oral hearing in Dublin into Shannon LNG in 2008. And the real problem is that it just shows you how LNG clouds are relatively easily ignited. You know, that doesn't create a fire, the rapid expansion. But what happened was they think that there was a concrete block that hit an electrostatically charged fence, and that created an ignition source, which then blew up everything. Now, the walls of that were 88 meters long, so you can just, I think that camera shot is from about 5 miles back. And you can just see that the real thing is that LNG clouds can be easily ignited. And the real is, I think you're just going to get one more camera shot from a different angle. So there you have your typical mushroom cloud. Now, when Shannon LNG told us that, oh, this is no problem, it's perfectly safe, it will be contained locally, it's never a risk to anybody. But when we know that we're in the 3 mile distance, that anyone is within harm's way from a 3 mile distance, you look at the port of Cork, where they're planning to bring in the next decade. And the 3 mile, it's roughly in this area here in Cork, but the 3 mile area is covering the town of Cove, and it covers a pretty wide radius. And equally in Gibbstown in New Jersey, in the Delaware River, where New Fortress Energy are planning their terminal, it's roughly 3 miles to Philadelphia International Airport. Now, I know that 10 years ago, the issue in the States was that the FERC looked at land-based exclusion zones, but they didn't look at water-based exclusion zones. So that might be interesting for Tracey to figure out that if they're bringing tankers all the way up the Delaware River, they have to consider the risks of an LNG spill on water, which you could see from the video beforehand, that is a huge safety issue. And it's just very much worth bearing that in mind, that if they never disclose what they really were doing in Gibbstown, then the Philadelphia International Airport, which is now in the sacrifice zone, if you wish, that has an issue that maybe that they need to look at. So what we were saying in Ireland was that you have to obey the rules, and the laws are actually made by politicians. So I just looked there briefly at the impacts of the safety issues, but there's also the health issues and the environmental issues, which I'm sure Sive will talk about next. And the politicians have to obey the laws, but they also make the policies, but they also make the laws. So we are saying that for projects in Europe that are being used by the EU and the US to import gas, liquefied gas from the US into Europe, they're giving these projects a special status called Project of Common Interest status. But those projects cannot stay on that list without member state support. So we're now looking for the next government, and I'm sure we're going to get it, because we're getting full support from all political parties here now in Ireland, that we have to act in solidarity. We have to think of our global impact. We cannot be using non-territorial emissions saying that's not our problem. So the first thing we want to happen in the new government is that we're going to inform the European Commission that Ireland no longer supports Shannon LNG or any other next decade being on a project of common interest list, which means then we control our own policy and we can decide what is in the public interest. And we're saying that they have a great responsibility to act in a reasonable and in determining in an evidence-based decision-making way what is in the national interest. And we're asking them then to ban the importation of fracked gas, and then we will work towards a global ban on fracking. So that's where we are at the moment. I mean, I know Richard said at the very beginning, there are a lot of, in the campaign, there are many issues. So these are just some of the issues I said I'd bring up to your attention. Thank you very much.
Perfect, Johnny. Thanks a million for that. And finally, so we have, so I'm going to just mute you there for Johnny. So we've Dr. Sive Lee from Doctors from the Irish Environment. So Sive, Aideen's going to share. Can you hear us, Sive?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, so I think Aideen's going to share her desktop with the presentation because we've had technology issues. So.
Thanks, Aideen. Perfect, thanks, Aideen. So hi everyone, my name is Sive and I'm from Irish Doctors for the Environment, and I was also involved in Not Here, Not Anywhere way back at the start, so I'm delighted to be back speaking with you tonight, and thanks to all the other speakers for the talk so far. It was really interesting. So I can go on to the next slide there, Aideen. There's 3 pictures on this, so you might have to click 3 times. It was going for, yeah, thanks a million. So there is a lot of talk about the health impacts of fracking, and you see a lot of it in the media. There's one thing just to note while I'm going through this, is that there aren't a lot of scientific studies done on this in peer-reviewed journals. So a lot of what we talk about is kind of potential health impacts or things that are probable or possible, but that we don't really have the kind of robust research there as of yet. So that's just something to bear in mind. Next slide, please, Aideen. We heard a lot tonight from other people about the environmental impacts of fracking and LNG. So I'm just going to pick out the ones that kind of have the most impact on health. So obviously air pollution has been mentioned a lot, and this would be a major one. And this is one that we do know, obviously burning LNG itself is going to release a lot of fuels, but there is air pollution released in all stages of the fracking cycle. So when it's from the trucks and the equipment that they use, the processing and transport of the gas, leaks from the wells, leaks after they close the wells, and spills and well blowouts. And so methane is obviously the major one that we worry about, but there are also things like silica, which comes from the sand that they use, and other ones that Leann mentioned, like benzene, nitrous oxide, and other non-methane volatile organic compounds. In terms of water then, obviously a lot of water is used in the fracking process. And then you also have concerns about water pollution, so your groundwater and surface water pollution from well leaks, from disposal of wastewater, and from gas release as well. And there are kind of over 1,000 chemicals that are used in the fracking process, ranging from things like metals like barium and strontium to non-organic radioactive materials and other compounds that are found in petroleum and cleaning products, and nothing that you would be drinking on a regular basis. So obviously concerns about these getting into water supplies. Some studies have shown that there is potential links between increased earthquake activity and fracking in states near fault lines in the US. In terms of occupational hazards, you have, for the workers, that have increased exposure to high noise levels, high light levels from flares, fires and explosions on the sites, because obviously they're dealing with flammable material. In terms of the social aspect then, the infrastructure of the wells and everything can lead to kind of loss of green spaces for communities, and also obviously a lot of concerns from communities who are having these wells and infrastructure built near them. And then ultimately, of course, as we've mentioned as well, methane is a really powerful climate change gas, and so the amount that is released with fracking contributes to climate change. Okay, next slide, Adrian. And these are the main health domains affected. So I don't know if you can see the top one there, but what that says is non-communicable diseases. And what that means is things like respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular illnesses, cancers, diseases that aren't transmitted from one person to another. There's effects on pregnancy, mental health, accident and injury, potential links between cancer and endocrine. I'll talk about that one a little bit more, and then the effects of climate change. So I can, next slide, please. And yeah, thank you. So in terms of non-communicable diseases, these are affected mainly by the air pollution and also by the loss of green spaces, loss of kind of outdoor areas. So respiratory illnesses, and one of the major ones have been gone through some of the studies that are peer-reviewed. There's a big link between fracking, people who live near fracking areas, and increasing asthma exacerbations. And then you also have other respiratory illnesses like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and lung cancer, which are affected by air pollutants. There's also links with cardiovascular disease, so high blood pressure and myocardial infarction or heart attacks, links to stroke and links to renal disease as well. And in terms of the green spaces, obviously, if you're losing areas near you where you can exercise, that's going to have an impact on your cardiovascular health as well. And next slide. And one thing that is kind of looked at quite a lot in these areas is pregnancy. And I guess it's an easier one to study because it is a kind of a short-term health state. If you think about it, it's a 9-month period. So what they're seeing in some of these communities is that there's an increased rate of small for gestational age babies, which means that the fetus, before it's born, is measuring below the centile that it should be for the number of weeks of pregnancy. And that's associated in turn with a low birth weight, which itself is associated with increased risk of infection for the baby, respiratory problems, low blood sugars, and admission to the neonatal ICU at the time of birth. Some states have shown higher rates of high-risk pregnancies in these areas, and what that means is that there is either a maternal or a fetal complication that requires closer monitoring during the pregnancy. And studies in Pennsylvania and Texas have showed somewhere between 25 to 40% increased risk of a preterm birth for communities who live near fracking wells. And again, that's associated with increased risks for the newborn baby. And next slide. And a hugely important one to talk about as well is mental health. Obviously, communities who live near these sites or potential sites such as here in Ireland as well are going to experience a lot of anxiety about the environmental and the health impacts of these of this infrastructure, and that can also be linked to depression as well. There's a study in Ireland that was done by Tilda, which is the Centre for Aging, and it showed that in elderly population, those who live near the sea and have access to the sea have lower rates of depression. So it just kind of emphasizes that the links between nature and mental health are really, really strong, and it's a really important aspect of health to consider in this. Next slide. And then in terms of accident and injury, so with kind of increased trucks on the road near these areas, you're going to have increased risk of road traffic accidents. Sorry, that's what RTA stands for. There's also the accidents in the workplace, as we mentioned, from explosions or fires, and then death or injury from earthquakes if there is increased earthquake activity from the fracking. Next. And then this is something, so there is, if you Google, you'll find that there's people say there's links between fracking and the chemicals and cancers and endocrine problems. The issue with this is that the fracking hasn't really been around long enough yet to prove this for sure. So while we do know that there are some chemicals used in fracking that have previously been shown to be linked to cancers like bladder, thyroid, or hematological blood cancers like leukemia, there isn't conclusive data yet from fracking. There is also the potential similar way that it could affect fertility, but this is something that we'd have to do kind of longer term studies on to be sure. Because while we know as well that those chemicals are all there, we don't know for certain if they're there in high enough quantities to have a direct health effect. So that's that. And the next slide, please. And then climate change itself. So obviously climate change has a huge impact on human health, and that's something at IDE that we really focus on. So we're seeing increasing extreme weather events like heat waves, which affect over 18 million vulnerable people a year, floodings, droughts, increasing food insecurity, which has impacts for people's nutrition, increased spread of and number of vector-borne diseases such as malaria, and then increasing migration as well from climate disasters, which migration obviously has a lot of impacts for your health. I won't get into now, but next slide, please. So we know that fracking is banned here in Ireland. This report from the EPA in 2017 at the end kind of goes through a number of variables and says, you know, the potential impact from fracking on these, ranging from mild, moderate, severe and profound. And it said that fracking would have profound impacts for our gas emissions, our ground and surface water quality, and our wildlife disruption, and severe impacts on our landscape disruption as well. So it doesn't really make sense for us to be banning it here and still willing to import it from elsewhere. And the next slide, please. One thing to consider with a lot of these studies is confounding factors. So the communities who are often most affected by these fracking wells tend to be more rural communities, poor communities, sometimes communities of colour who may not have, who may have kind of pre-existing health problems. So that is something we just have to bear in mind as well. And that links straight into climate justice. Obviously, once again, communities who are the least well equipped and the least responsible are being impacted very highly by this. And going forward, what we certainly need is to do proper studies that look at the environmental exposure and kind of link it properly to show a good cause effect relationship there. And that's everything from me. Thanks very much for having me.
Sorry, perfect slide. Thank you very much. So we're just going to pass over to, firstly, I just want to thank all the panelists actually. I really appreciate you all coming out tonight. Some fascinating testimonials. And so the next section, we're running a bit behind time, so the Q&A section might last as long, but we're going to pass it over to my campaign colleague, Aileen O'Doherty, and she's going to facilitate the Q&A session. So Aileen, you are unmuted there now. You're good to go.
Perfect. Oh, it's a dangerous thing to unmute me. Yeah, so thank you, fantastic speakers, and we have some great questions as well. So we're going to try and get through a few of them while keeping on time, and some of them have been answered online, but within the webinar. But I think it's useful to maybe get some just broader views from the panelists on some of the questions. So I'm going to start with a a question from Kira. So question for all US speakers. So what campaigning tools are most useful in opposing LNG in the US? So would it be things like taking part in consultations, meeting specific politicians, court cases, protests, and direct actions? So what campaigning tools are do you find most useful? Patrick has kindly answered that question in the Q&A, but I might also put that question to Tracey and to Tribal Chairman Juan Mancias also. So if one of you would like to, yeah, what do you think the most useful campaigning tools are in opposing LNG?
I can just unmute. Oh, good. Okay, so I mean, what we found is you really need to fight it at every level. We fight through the courts, appealing permits. We're strategic about that because we focus on the biggest permits, the ones they can't move ahead without. But we participate in the comment process on every permit that has any sort of comment process. So we're involved in commenting and encouraging the public to get involved through commenting on any permit that comes up, any approval, any review. We, turn out people to hearings, fill the room with people who are we provide talking points, or they go through the materials and make up their own comments. But we really try to fill those rooms in order to be able to use the public process to allow people to have some influence over the decision making that these government agencies are making. So we do that as well. We also find that it's absolutely critical to do grassroots organizing, to do organizing of the community through first educating and reaching out and sharing information, but then also trying to bring people into having a hand in how they might be able to influence things. For instance, in Pennsylvania, there's interest in going to municipalities to pass resolutions against the transport of by truck through their communities. And a resolution passed at a local level may not be able to stop it, but it speaks volumes when you get many, many municipalities speaking up and as constituencies and telling state legislators and those who at these government agencies are supposed to be listening to the public, what the public thinks. And we find the higher the public controversy is raised, the greater the chance is that the public is going to be able to have put a dent in what their plans are. We also do a lot of investigative work. We do a lot of research. We do a lot of digging. There's a great program called Little Sis, and Little Sis is like the opposite of Big Brother. And you look at corporations and what their interconnecting boards are, who's chairman of this and that. And New Fortress Energy, for instance, has dozens and dozens of subsidiaries. And Wes Edens is on many, many boards. He's chairman of many boards that are interconnected in ways that you would not know unless you started digging in. And that kind of intelligence is really important to understand who your enemy is, and how to affect, what might be the weak points. We also work through, however we can, influencing change at the decision-making process. So we do that proactively at the beginning, and then to try to get the rules changed, so then we have a better chance as members of the public to stop a project that the public does not want. But I think also, just advocacy work in general is absolutely based on moving people. And in the end, for instance, one of the decisions that was made by an agency that is interstate agency, it's made up by voting members that are the governors of the 4 states that flow to our watershed: New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, and a representative of the Trump administration from the Army Corps of Engineers. But those 5 voting members, 4 of them are elected, and they're governors of these states. So they are beholden to their constituents. So by organizing and speaking up through a system like that, for instance, we were just in court for the last 8 days fighting that permit as well, but also using the public platform. We find that can have a lot of power, and we've been able to stop projects in the past that way. So it's really a mix of many, many things, and depending on the project.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, Chairman Juan Mancias or Patrick, would you like to come in on that as well?
Yeah, I know I answered it in the Q&A. All those things that were previously discussed are great. And there's lots of resources, social media, of course. But Save Our GV has really tried to focus on the personal aspect and making the social connections. We've tried to really do a lot of in-person events, public events, protests, educational events, things like that. But with the social media and the in-person events, we've really tried to make the connection of how it affects people personally. And so I think that there is key. So whatever tools you use in any sort of campaign, making sure that we're connecting with how is it going to affect our lives negatively, and not dismissing the positive effects that a project may have. Of course, the LNG projects, Rio Grande especially, has promoted the jobs thing. And this is maybe especially important for what was discussed earlier, is that we live in one of the poorest areas in the country. We live very near Mexico, and a lot of our population is Spanish speaking. So a lot of the information that is out there is maybe not accessible to a lot of our community. So we have done a lot of translation of documents into Spanish. Are the companies doing that? No. So that's one of the things that the company is that next decade, they haven't really done outreach to our community with information about their project. Because most of our community is Spanish speaking. So we've done a lot of translating. We've done a lot of in-person events and trying to connect how it affects their lives. And that's really the most important part. One of the biggest things is taxes, okay? So Rio Grande LNG next decade, they ask for tax breaks, huge tax breaks. They will not be paying taxes. They'll make very small payments in lieu of taxes. So the economic impact to our community in terms of money is very, 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 very small because they asked for tax abatements, and unfortunately our local government gave it to them. So things like that, and our taxes have increased twice since then. So people are paying more taxes to make up for that difference. Things like that, just making that social and personal connection.
Okay, great. And Tribal Chairman Juan Mancias, would you like to respond to that question about campaigning tools?
Sometimes,
You're muted.
I'm already off. I think that a lot of it is just like what we've done this past weekend. Sometimes we have to take it upon ourselves to create those situations where we need to do the campaigning and show the real facts that are not being shared, because a lot of times we get we do kind of leave out the grassroots people in in a lot of the situations, and I think it's important that we include them some way and at least give them the facts of what's out there. One of the biggest things we have to do is, like, we have to vote. We've as a tribe have had to re-educate a lot of the people down in the area about our presence and how long we've been there and what you got to see our pasture means. So that's why we were able to go out and look for those research people that are already part of that, like the archaeologist who was part of the Army Corps of Engineers when they first set up the EIS. He was really concerned about it and was really upset over the fact that they weren't even paying attention to what was out there. And after, so many years of a place being pillaged and just robbed constantly by surveyors and landowners, and then a lot of those things being put out there like that on the private collectors. We have to be able to let those private collectors know that this is only the beginning of trying to not only stop the LFGs, but to stop the the craziness, to stop the craziness with everything else of going out there and pilfering, you know, whatever people can find out there. I know that a lot of things people have grown up, you know, looking for, like finding an arrowhead, and it was such a good thing. But the thing is, you take that arrowhead and you don't remember where you got it from. It doesn't help, you know, anybody in the sense of trying to identify a sacred site or identify a village or anything like that. So when those people come in and say, well, we don't know anything about here or what's going on here, you know, we have to be able to let them know that when they do their testing, they're only doing shovel tests. They're not really doing any kind of excavation to be able to recognize the place and how far down it goes or how many years it was there for, and for how long. Not that we want them digging them up, but I'm saying when you start looking at these things, when they do start digging, they don't care. We've seen that happen with the coal mine in Eagle Pass, and when they just found remains and then secretly went and reburied them. And if it hadn't been for a whistleblower, we would have never found that out. So that's why I think a lot of the professionals that are working with the government right now, that are truly scientific in that sense, are willing to come forward and to say, hey, look, you know, they screwed up. They're not telling you the whole truth. That's why we need to be able to take it upon ourselves to find those mediums where we can campaign toward against places like the Texas LNG, the Rio Grande LNG, and even the Nova LNG. And on top of that, you know, even their own scientific data about the pollutants that are being put up in the air is only per project, individual project, not as a cumulative situation where all three of them are really going to, you know, make an impact on the air quality in that area. And when you have a, you know, an air monitor that's so far away, only that's 15 miles away from where these places will be, that will make a big. They don't even want to put another air monitor in there that I understand of, and hopefully they'll create a situation where they do that. But we need to let the public know that, because the public's not aware of that, especially the public that lives there and all the communities that have denied the fact that they don't want those LNGs there. We need to let the whole nation know and the whole world know that there's people that are living there that are going to be affected by this, by these projects, and they're fully committed to getting these things done. Even like the freaking wall that's not even at the border. They keep talking about it being at the border. It's not there. They're lying to you, and that's what we need to do. We need to find a way to make sure that these lies are documented, so people will know that these are not facts per se, and that's what is happening with Garcia Pasture. That it's not just one little piece. That's a continuation of villages that go all the way over to the Nova LNG site and the Potrero de la Loma Chiquita, which is another, another meadow or another pasture that's in that area that needs to be also dealt with and be spoken about. And we need to bring those things up, because that is history. It might not be a historical national site, but it's still historical to the fact that it belonged to a certain people, and that was the people of that land.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Well, it's fantastic to hear the different campaigning tools and also the parallels between, you were talking about lies, as was Johnny. Very quickly, I hope if we can prey on people's time for just another couple of minutes. There's just one more question for the American side that I'm hoping I can get quick answers from the three of you on. I think I will. And then I was hoping if we head back to Johnny for the Irish related question. Just a quick question, and as I have you on screen here, Chairman Juan, we had a question about our government in Ireland has argued that, oh, not all gas that will be imported through LNG will be fracked. So the question is, what do you make of this claim? Is all the extraction going on over there fracking?
We have right here at Eagle Ford Shell, their fracking has increased. I've seen at least 50 more flares going up in the last year. And so with what's going on at the Permian Basin fracking, they're at a standstill because they can't get it to the coast because of the LNGs aren't up, but they're trying to go the other way and send it to the other ones that are down there, like the Echo 1 and Echo 2 pipelines. The pipeline that's coming out of yes, the spot terminal out in the middle of the Gulf. So they're trying to get away from the issue of, and they know that there is connection to the native original people of Texas, even though that we don't have their national recognition or federal recognition. We still have an ability to speak up and to say, hey, you need to stop this. And now they're going out into the Gulf of Mexico. So I don't know where they're getting their natural gas. I don't understand. They gotta purify it somewhere. So they got plants like the one over at Agua Dulce, and the ones that are there in what's that, Quintana, where they're purifying the gas to make it what they call a natural gas. It's still a gas, but it's a fracked gas. And that was my question from the very beginning to Sociedad General and to PNB Paribas is, well, where's gas come from? And all they could tell me is, we don't know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? Why are you building an LNG plant if you don't know where the gas is coming from? And so I had to continually ask that question, and that question needs to be asked constantly, because I want to know where the gas comes from. If it's not coming from the Odessa Permian, from the Permian Basin, or deposits, or from the Eagle Ford Shale here, or the Bakken Shale. Let's keep asking the question.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Patrick, you want to come in there?
I'll just add a little bit to that. I don't know the exact percentages and the exact amounts and but I will say with confidence that a majority of the activity in the Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford Shale is fracking. And it's creating a big problem in West Texas, especially because of the wastewater that's produced from that, where to store it, and the fact that it's kind of a desert-like area, and they're using a lot of water to do it. So and that has a lot of implications and impacts to agriculture and whatnot. So a vast majority is fracking. Now that it's a complicated question, because that gas is sent to kind of a, to my understanding anyway, is sent to a hub, and then, kind of a storage place for natural gas, and then sent down to where next decade will be. So that gas will be mixed from other sources of other gas. So in terms of tracing what gas is fracked and what gas is not fracked, I guess to my understanding is that it's really would be kind of all mixed in. But with confidence, I would say a vast majority of it is from fracked gas. And what Ireland would be getting from next decade, certainly a majority of that, I would feel safe in saying 90% of it would be from fracking. But that is certainly something in terms of maybe we can look at more in terms of what the ratio is between fracking and what activities out there are fracking and what is not fracking. And we'll send that to you here in the near future.
Great, thank you. And Tracy, just a quick word from you on that. Would the gas that New Fortress is exporting there on the Delaware River, would that be fracked gas?
Absolutely. They're playing semantics if they say they don't know where it's coming from or it's not fracked. Pennsylvania is the second largest natural gas producer in the nation today, and most of that is from the Marcellus Shale in the Marcellus Shale region in Pennsylvania. It provides 95% of that, and about 85% of all the gas wells in Pennsylvania are what's called unconventional. And then a smaller percentage of older gas wells, like Leann showed in the beginning, that are shallow are called conventional. But and fracking was not used yet when those unconventional early wells were drilled, for instance, in the Allegheny State Forest, federal forest. However, it is true that about 85% of all of the conventional, the old-fashioned wells today are fracked as well. So it's really semantics, whether or not it's a well that's down into a deep shale and uses the most modern hydraulic fracturing procedures, or whether it's a shallow well that's old and is refracked. They're all fracked today, pretty much. And by the time you're going to be looking at the specifics of where it's going, to Shannon from the United States, all of that is fracked. No conventional wells or non-fracked wells are providing. As a matter of fact, Chesapeake is the supplier that New Fortress Energy has the contract with to extract the gas from the wells, and New Fortress built their LNG processing, or they are in the process of building their plant right in the middle of the lease holdings of Chesapeake Energy. It's all fracked gas, they're all new wells. And good news for us, Chesapeake Energy just filed for bankruptcy. So there's as we were saying earlier, there's a lot of weak links in this very complicated Rube Goldberg kind of system that New Fortress is playing games with.
That's great to hear that bit of good news. So Johnny, I'm going to pass over to you. I know we're getting very, well, yes, we are over time, but I just want to give Johnny a few minutes because there were some questions relating to, so government formation here in Ireland. Just to give a really quick explanation, we had a general election recently, and we currently have a few parties negotiating for government. Some of them have explicitly stated they're against LNG import terminals. Some have been less explicit, and there's a few questions in the chat about wondering what the panelists think. So Johnny, would you like to say a few words on that?
Yeah, thanks, Aideen. Yeah, first of all, 74 of the, you need 80 for a majority in the Irish Parliament, and 74 of the parliamentarians have already signed a pledge to work against the importation of US fracked gas and the construction of fracked gas import terminals in Ireland, as well as to work against fracking in Northern Ireland. And the final two parties that had not signed up to it last week or 2 weeks ago said that LNG terminals do not make sense and we already have energy security. So every single party in Ireland now has a policy against fracked gas imports, and that is highly important. So that's why the programme for government, even if these three parties don't form a government, if it fails, every other party and even all the parties that are currently in the programme for negotiation talks have said that they're against fracked gas import terminals. So I think it's inevitable that we're going to ban the importation of fracked gas.
Okay, fantastic for that. Thank you for that, Johnny. And now that it is 2040, we've gone slightly over time, I am going to hand back to Richard. Oh, first of all, thank you to all the panelists for answering the questions so graciously, and to the attendees for putting the questions. They were great. And yeah, I'm going to hand back to Richard to close us out.
Yeah, so guys, yeah, I'd like to echo that, like, thank you for all the panelists for joining us tonight and sharing their stories. And this is how we're kind of going to build this kind of movement even bigger into a global movement. And it's interesting what Tracey says, like this kind of fracking, kind of LNG house of cards is beginning to fall. We see lots of kind of projects being financially delayed. So the more pressure we put on, the more investors get scared off. So any kind of work we go do here in Ireland or in America or anywhere in Europe has a massive impact. So on that note, I'd just like to thank everyone. What we're going to do is this webinar was recorded, so we're going to share it online with the different speakers. And if you have any questions, just get in contact with Not Here, Not Anywhere, and we'll pass on any of the questions you have for any of the speakers. But yeah, thank you very much again, and yeah, good night.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.